The music was still playing when Prince William saw the diamonds. For one frozen second, he said nothing. Then his expression changed, his hand lifted, and the entire royal reception came to a halt. Queen Camilla was standing beneath the chandeliers, wearing the late Queen's diamond diadem, an object William believed had been protected under strict palace instructions. Guests fell silent as the future king stepped forward and demanded to know who had authorized it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William did not look away. Buckingham Palace had opened its rooms to honor Commonwealth representatives. The Commonwealth is a voluntary group of nations linked by shared history, and this reception was meant to display unity. Instead, the prince had turned it into a test of royal authority. Camilla's smile vanished as every conversation died. The diamond diadem was not simply expensive jewelry. It was a historic crown ornament worn by Queen Elizabeth II and tied to sovereign power, continuity, and the memory of a monarch William had loved. The queen consort raised one hand toward it, then stopped. Charles watched his son cross the room with a steadiness that frightened him. The king understood that William was not challenging jewelry. He was challenging a decision made inside the monarch's household, in front of representatives. William reached Camilla and lowered his voice. This reception cannot continue while that remains unanswered. She stared at him, wounded and defiant, while the monarch gripped a chair and said nothing. The future king then ordered the musicians to stop and suspended the reception until the diadem's release could be explained. A senior dresser moved toward an equerry, a palace officer who assists members of the royal household. She whispered that the diadem had never appeared on the approved jewelry list delivered that morning. The queen heard enough to understand the danger, and her face tightened. Anne noticed something worse. The Princess Royal examined the velvet case and saw that its storage seal had been broken. That seal protected objects held within the royal collection, the art, jewels, and historic possessions kept for the monarchy. 2 signatures should have been required. Only one could be found. Catherine watched the doors close as guests were guided into an adjoining gallery. Then an aide leaned toward William and delivered the message that changed everything. The diadem may have left secure storage before dawn, but the diamonds were only the visible part of the crisis, because behind William's decision stood years of grief, rivalry, and promises that had never truly been forgotten. For William, the diadem carried the memory of a grandmother who had prepared him for duty long before he was ready to inherit it. For Camilla, it represented acceptance at the highest level of royal life. And for Charles, it became a painful test between the woman beside him and the son who would one day replace him. One object had placed 3 private histories beneath the unforgiving light of public duty. William remembered the late Queen's warnings with painful clarity. She had taught him that royal symbols were never meant to comfort wounded pride or strengthen personal status. They belonged to the crown, meaning the enduring institution, rather than any single person wearing it. To him, the diadem represented restraint, responsibility, and a promise that history would never be bent to satisfy private emotion. Camilla carried a different wound. She had spent years trying to secure her place beside the sovereign, while public suspicion followed every step. The queen consort believed the diamonds would show continuity between one reign and the next. Inside a private antechamber, she told her dresser that she had worn them to honor the monarchy. Then her voice hardened. William had not seen tribute. He had seen overreach. Catherine closed the door behind her husband and gently removed the speech card still crushed in his hand. The princess understood that he was caught between grief and constitutional responsibility, the formal duty to protect the monarchy's rules and authority. If I ignore this tonight, I will be expected to ignore everything that follows, William said. She held his gaze and answered, "Then be certain before you act again." Charles faced his own painful choice. In a quiet exchange with Anne, the king admitted that he had approved a different diamond headpiece for the reception. He had never authorized the late monarch's diadem. The confession changed the meaning of the entire evening, because Camilla's defense now rested on permission that the sovereign himself said he had not given. Anne did not soften the truth. The Princess Royal revealed through a private documented account kept among her personal papers that Queen Elizabeth had issued instructions limiting use of the diadem until a future sovereign reviewed its status. Those instructions had never been publicly announced, but they had never been withdrawn. William stood alone beside a covered portrait of his grandmother and pressed his fingers against his forehead. "I cannot let memory be rewritten through ceremony," he whispered. His anger was fading, but his resolve was becoming harder. Anne then delivered the warning that pulled the crisis deeper into the past. The restriction had not begun that night. It began after an earlier confrontation the palace had deliberately hidden. To understand why William reacted with such force, the story must return to the moment when the late Queen's diadem first became the center of a secret royal dispute. The crisis did not begin at the reception. It began 2 years earlier, during a private ceremony inside Windsor Castle, when a request involving the same diadem forced the late Queen's wishes into direct conflict with the new royal order. Only 4 people heard the exchange. No announcement followed. No official record was released. Yet what happened inside that room became the point of no return, and William never forgot the promise made before the vault door closed. Charles entered the jewelry room, believing the review would be routine. Senior royals had gathered to decide which ceremonial pieces could return to public use after Queen Elizabeth's death, and which would remain restricted. Ceremonial jewelry means historic objects worn during major state occasions, where every choice carries a message about authority, succession, and continuity. William attended because several pieces were tied to future coronations and the duties he would one day inherit. Camilla broke the silence first. She asked that the diamond diadem be reserved for her first major Commonwealth reception, presenting the request as a tribute to the monarchy's stability. The Queen Consort spoke carefully, but her meaning was clear. She wanted the piece to confirm that the new reign had fully accepted her place within it. Anne reacted at once. The Princess Royal opened a handwritten instruction preserved among the late Queen's private papers and read it aloud. The diadem could not be used again unless both the sovereign and the heir approved its release. Her documented account left no room for misunderstanding. Charles considered the request reasonable. The king set down his pen, pushed the authorization sheet toward William, and waited. The prince looked at the diamonds, then at his father, before slowly moving the document back across the table without signing it. Anger replaced restraint. Charles accused his son of allowing grief to control the present. William answered that grief had nothing to do with it. He was protecting a promise. The future king refused to turn his grandmother's final instruction into an obstacle that could simply be removed when it became inconvenient. Camilla stepped away from the table, but she paused at the door. "Your refusal makes me feel permanently judged by a past I cannot change," she told William. He did not answer, and her silence afterward carried more pain than any argument. Anne waited until the Queen had left, before warning William that someone had already requested a duplicate access key to the collection room. The request had been filed through palace channels, but no clear reason had been given. Charles and William then signed a temporary restriction order, a written command limiting access until a formal review could take place. The prince believed the matter was settled. It was not. The archived copy later appeared without the page requiring the heir's approval. Back in the present, William learned that the missing page had last been handled by an official now serving inside Camilla's household. Now, with the forgotten restriction exposed and the reception frozen, William must confront Camilla face to face, and this time, neither of them can leave the room. The doors closed behind them, leaving William and Camilla in a room without guests, music, or ceremony to soften what came next. The prince did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He asked one direct question. Who had authorized the diadem? Camilla answered with another. Since when had the future king gained the right to humiliate the reigning queen before an entire royal reception? William had requested the private meeting, while palace officials struggled to explain the interruption outside. Camilla, Charles, Catherine, and Anne stood together as the reception waited in silence. The queen still wore the diadem, because such historic jewelry had to be removed by trained staff. But her refusal to sit made the confrontation feel even sharper. Camilla held herself steady. The queen consort knew every person in the room understood what the stoppage meant. It had not only questioned her choice, it had challenged her place beside the sovereign in front of hundreds of guests. William stepped closer. "This is not about whether you deserve respect," he said. "It is about whether protected royal symbols can be used without the consent required to release them." The Prince of Wales is the title traditionally given to the direct heir, and in that moment, he was speaking with the authority of the future crown. Camilla's anger broke through. She accused him of hiding old resentment behind procedure. The queen said the reception had been stopped to shame her, not to defend the monarchy. William rejected the charge, but she pressed harder, telling him that he had turned private grief into public punishment. Catherine watched her husband choose every word carefully. The princess knew one uncontrolled sentence could destroy any chance of repair. Anne remained near Charles, while the king looked from his son to his wife and realized the argument was no longer about diamonds alone. William moved within a few feet of Camilla. "I am asking you as Prince of Wales to remove the diadem until its release is explained." She held his gaze. "And I am telling you that I entered this reception with the king's knowledge." Charles answered at once. The monarch admitted he knew a diamond headpiece had been approved, but he had never been told this specific piece had been selected. Camilla turned toward him in disbelief. The confidence behind her defense vanished. Anne then opened her personal case and produced the original restriction note. The Princess Royal explained that the document required joint approval from both the sovereign and the heir. William's signature was absent. The proof changed the room. Camilla finally raised her hands as the dresser approached. Once the diadem was removed, she did not look at William. She faced Charles instead. "Did you know he would do this to me?" The king remained silent. Before she could say more, an aide entered with a recorded ledger update. The jewelry register had been altered less than 3 hours before the reception. The confrontation had ended, but the balance of power had shifted, and the next decision would reveal who truly controlled the palace when the king's family turned against itself. Stopping a royal reception required more than anger. William knew that one reckless command could be dismissed as a son challenging his father. Yet the palace soon discovered that the prince had acted with authority quietly granted to him months earlier. As Charles's workload had changed, the heir had been given broader responsibility over ceremonial security and succession-linked property. The order was not a symbolic protest. It carried the weight of the monarchy's future command. William's expanded duties placed him over objects tied to succession, coronations, and the constitutional identity of the sovereign. Succession-linked property means historic items connected to the transfer of royal authority from one monarch to the next. The diadem fell directly inside that responsibility, because its use could send a powerful message about legitimacy and future command. Charles had approved those duties during an earlier palace review. The king believed his son needed real experience before inheriting the crown, not empty preparation hidden behind ceremony. Now that decision had returned with painful force. Authority granted in private had been used against an event hosted in his own name. William entered the monarch's study and placed the delegation order on the desk. Charles pointed toward the door, but the prince did not move. "You gave me this duty because one day I will have no one else to blame," he said. The king kept his hand raised for a moment, then slowly lowered it. Betrayal burned beneath Charles's silence. He felt his son had turned trust into a public challenge. William answered that authority meant nothing if it disappeared the moment enforcing it became uncomfortable. The future king would not accept responsibility only when every decision pleased the family. Charles sat alone after William left and opened the original order. A delegation order is a written document, giving another royal authority to act on the monarch's behalf. The king read the paragraph carrying his signature twice before setting it down. Anger remained, but reluctant recognition had entered beside it. Anne then confirmed the hardest truth through a recorded security briefing. The heir had the power to pause any ceremony involving restricted crown objects, whenever authorization or safety was disputed. The Princess Royal made clear that William had not seized control. He had used control already given to him. Catherine uncovered something even more dangerous. While reviewing the altered ledger, the princess found an access code assigned to a member of Camilla's private office. The staff member denied making the change and demanded that the system logs be checked. That denial did not calm the room. It widened the mystery. Charles made his decision. The reception would not resume until responsibility was established. Camilla heard the ruling in silence, then realized someone close to her may have engineered the humiliation. Authority explained why William could stop the reception, but it could not prevent the damage already spreading through the Queen's household and the royal family. Within minutes, the reception's glittering promise had become a palace emergency. Guests were quietly escorted away, staff phones were collected, and every entrance to the jewelry offices was sealed. Yet the harshest consequence unfolded behind a closed door, where Camilla sat without the diadem, and realized that the institution she had fought to enter was now investigating her own household. The diamonds were gone, but the shame they had created remained painfully visible. Palace officials announced that the reception had been postponed because of an internal ceremonial issue. That phrase meant a serious problem involving royal procedure, but it revealed almost nothing to the guests being guided away. They were asked not to discuss what they had witnessed. The request only made the silence feel heavier. Security officers locked the collection room and secured the altered jewelry ledger, the official record showing when royal pieces enter or leave storage. 3 members of Camilla's staff lost their access privileges within the hour. The Queen reacted with fury when her private secretary was removed from duty. To her, the decision felt less like caution and more like an attack on her independence. Charles entered her room carrying the weight of 2 impossible loyalties. The king told her that he could not promise William's order would be reversed while the investigation remained active. Camilla looked at him with disbelief. "Your silence wounded me more than the reception," she said. "You watched him take everything from me, and you said nothing." Charles tried to explain that the evidence had changed too quickly. The monarch insisted that speaking without certainty could have damaged her further. Camilla heard only hesitation. When he finally closed the bedroom door, she waited until his footsteps disappeared. Camilla then removed the reception program from her handbag. The queen consort folded it once and placed it beneath the empty jewelry case. She sat before the mirror, took off her earrings with shaking hands, and placed them on the table one at a time. Success had once brought her into the palace. Now the same palace was treating her household like a danger. Investigators uncovered the next blow through a recorded security review. The Diadem case had been collected on a verbal instruction falsely attributed to Charles. Someone had used the king's name to make the release appear legitimate. The records revealed something worse. The instruction came through an internal telephone extension inside Camilla's private office, but no system could identify who had physically made the call. Suspicion now lived inside her own rooms. William prepared a permanent restriction that would remove the diadem from use for years. Catherine stopped him before he signed it. The princess asked her husband to meet Camilla alone before making a decision that could destroy the family beyond repair. The investigation had produced evidence, but Catherine understood that evidence alone could not heal what happened. Only an honest, private conversation could change the course of the crisis. There were no advisors in the room when William sat opposite Camilla the following morning. No private secretaries, no legal officials, no one to convert pain into palace language. For the first time since the reception, the future king and the queen faced each other not as competing royal authorities, but as two people carrying different wounds from the same family history. What Camilla admitted did not excuse the diadem, but it changed William's understanding of how it reached her. Catherine had persuaded her husband to listen before signing permanent sanctions against Camilla's household. The princess knew sanctions meant formal penalties, including suspended access and removal of duties. She feared one final order could turn a damaged relationship into an irreversible family break. William agreed to one meeting, but only if no record was made until both sides had spoken freely. Camilla entered the small morning room without ceremony. The queen consort admitted she had wanted to wear the diadem, because she feared her role was becoming ceremonial in name, but emotionally rejected within the family. She had gained the title, the position, and the public duties, yet still felt that every symbol of acceptance remained beyond her reach. William listened, but he did not soften immediately. The prince told her that using his grandmother's diadem without his consent felt like the erasure of a promise. Queen Elizabeth had trusted him to protect certain parts of her legacy, and he believed that trust had been pushed aside for one evening of reassurance. Camilla then revealed the source of her confidence through a private briefing card given to her by her secretary. The handwritten note stated that Charles had personally approved the peace, and that William had withdrawn his earlier objection. She said she had believed the matter was settled before the reception began. Camilla pushed the card across the table. William read it twice, then placed it down. "You should have asked me," he said. She answered quietly, "I thought the answer had already been given." For the first time, his anger gave way to understanding. William recognized the wording. The future king had seen the same formal phrases in earlier collection reports, prepared by a former royal advisor, dismissed after the Windsor dispute. A collections advisor is an official who helps manage and document historic royal objects. That link suggested the deception had been planned by someone who understood both households. Camilla accepted that the diadem must return to restricted storage. The Queen offered to support William's decision publicly, but asked him to state clearly that she had never knowingly defied the late monarch's instruction. He agreed. Together, they prepared to confront Charles and expose the official who had manipulated them both. Yet beyond the palace gates, the silence had already broken, and the world was demanding its own explanation. By morning, the halted reception was no longer a private royal crisis. It was the only story Britain seemed willing to discuss. Commentators debated tradition, power, grief, and whether William had protected the crown or humiliated its queen. Outside Buckingham Palace, cameras faced the gates as crowds gathered beneath the grey London sky. One interrupted evening had become a public referendum on who controlled royal history and who would define the monarchy's next chapter. International broadcasters broke into scheduled programs with the same urgent line. William had stopped a royal reception after challenging Camilla's use of the diamond diadem. The phrase royal reception meant a formal gathering hosted by senior members of the monarchy, for diplomats, officials, and invited guests. Suspending such an event was not a minor interruption. It suggested that conflict had reached the highest level of the royal household. Palace officials came under immediate pressure. They had to explain why the heir possessed enough authority to halt an event held in Charles's name. Supporters of the king called the decision an alarming challenge to the reigning monarch. Others argued that William had proved royal rules meant nothing unless they applied even when family loyalties were at risk. A leading London newspaper captured the crisis in one brutal front page. Beneath an image of the palace gates, the headline declared, "The night the diamonds stopped to the crown." The words spread across broadcasts and public debate, turning one disputed jewel into a symbol of a divided monarchy. Crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace before midday. One elderly woman lifted a photograph of Queen Elizabeth toward a broadcaster and said, "Some things belong to history before they belong to anyone wearing them." Her recorded comment became the sentence repeated across the country. Camilla's supporters condemned the stoppage as unnecessarily cruel. They argued that the Queen had been publicly shamed for trusting an authorization she believed was genuine. William's defenders answered that his duty was to protect the crown, not spare powerful people from embarrassment. The palace then confirmed the breakthrough through a formal recorded statement. A former collections advisor had used an active security credential to alter the jewelry ledger and send false approval through Camilla's office. The deception had been designed to place the Queen against the future king. William watched the coverage beside Catherine and appeared shaken by its scale. "I meant to stop one reception," the prince admitted. "I did not mean to divide the country over my grandmother's memory." The princess reminded him that truth often carried consequences no one could control. Charles read the newspaper headline in silence. The king folded the front page, looked toward William and Camilla, and said, "This ends today not with victory, but with truth." The culprit had been found, and the public had delivered its judgment, but only the monarch could decide what the halted reception would mean for his family and the future crown. The final decision did not belong to anger, rivalry, or the person who wore the diamonds. It belonged to the crown itself. Standing before his family, Charles acknowledged that the diadem had been released through deception, that Camilla had accepted false authorization, and that William had acted within his duty by stopping the reception. Yet the king also recognized the deeper wound. A monarchy cannot survive when symbols of continuity become weapons in a struggle for belonging. Charles summoned William, Camilla, Catherine, and Anne to a final family council after the former collections advisor confessed through a recorded security interview. A family council meant a private royal meeting where urgent decisions affecting the household were settled away from public ceremony. The dismissed official admitted he had altered the ledger in revenge, hoping to turn the king's household against the Prince of Wales and weaken both sides. Charles delivered the ruling without hesitation. The diamond diadem would return permanently to restricted royal storage. It could only be worn again by a reigning female sovereign, or through written approval signed jointly by the monarch and the direct heir. The decision ended every argument over access. Camilla listened as the king publicly cleared her of deliberate disrespect. He confirmed in a formal palace statement that she had accepted false authorization and had not knowingly violated the late queen's instruction. Yet Charles also said she should have verified the approval before wearing such a powerful symbol. The Queen accepted the judgment without protest. William received a different verdict. The monarch confirmed that his son had acted lawfully and responsibly when he halted the reception. Still, the prince admitted that duty did not excuse every consequence. He regretted confronting Camilla before hundreds of guests, when a private conversation might have prevented her humiliation. William later approached the Queen withoid aides present. "I am sorry for how I stopped you," he said, "but I am not sorry that I protected the diadem." Camilla accepted his apology and answered with painful honesty. Her desire to feel fully accepted had made her ignore questions she should have asked. Anne then approved new safeguards through a documented security order. The compromised officials were removed, access procedures were rewritten, and no ceremonial jewel could leave secure storage on verbal authority alone. Catherine supported the reforms because they protected both the monarchy and the people vulnerable to manipulation within it. Several weeks later, the reception was held again. Camilla wore a sapphire necklace, chosen from her personal collection, while William and Catherine entered beside her. Before they stepped forward, the Queen paused and said, "Tonight, we begin again." The prince offered his arm. She accepted it, and Charles watched with quiet relief. The diamonds returned to the vault, but the lesson remained in full view. The crown is not protected by possession, pride, or silence. It survives when duty becomes stronger than personal pain. William's decision was severe, but it proved that no royal figure stood above responsibility. Camilla's humiliation ended not in defeat, but in recognition that respect came from service rather than symbolism. Charles restored order without sacrificing his wife or his heir. The crisis was over, the diadem was secure, and the family emerged changed but united. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.